Everyone adored Jace Kane, the quarterback, the scholar, the son every parent in town wished they had, and everyone overlooked Ezra Kane, his younger brother. At 17, Ezra was already labeled too quiet, too soft, too openly gay, a permanent outcast in a house that worshiped masculinity like religion. Their mother always said Ezra was just going through a phase, but she never looked him in the eye when she said it. Their father didn't bother hiding the coldness. And Jace wore cruelty like cologne. It hung on him. It followed Ezra through the halls, into the locker rooms, even into family dinners, where jokes were made at Ezra's expense and nobody stopped them. Ezra had learned to shrink himself, to keep his head down, to survive. But survival has a limit. That day, the sky was already turning gray when Ezra walked home early. A migraine, he told the school nurse, but painkillers wouldn't fix what was waiting behind the front door. He heard it before he saw it. Muffled screams, a desperate voice, furniture scraping, then silence. Ezra's steps slowed as he reached the hallway leading to Jace's room. Through the crack in the door, he saw her, Tessa, curled into herself, her face red and wet with tears, her hands trying to push Jace away. But Jace wasn't backing off. His hands were wrapped tight around her neck. Ezra didn't think. He just moved. He pulled out his phone, hit record. His hands trembled, but the camera caught everything. Jace's snarling voice, Tessa's eyes begging, her lips mouthing words that couldn't come out. And then Jace let go. Ezra ran, not away, but to the living room, where he called 911. By the time the police arrived, Jace had already cleaned up, smoothed his shirt, put on the golden boy mask, but the footage didn't lie. The backlash was immediate, not against Jace, against Ezra. Their mother screamed like a woman betrayed. "How could you do this to your own brother?" Their father shoved Ezra against the doorframe. "You jealous little snake," he hissed. "Get out." And he did. In the middle of the night, no bag, no shoes, just the clothes he wore and the video that burned in his pocket. The air was cold. The streets were empty. Ezra didn't cry. Not because he wasn't hurt, he just didn't have anything left to cry with. He wandered until his legs gave out near an old basketball court behind the church. He didn't know where to go, didn't care. He curled up beneath the rusty bleachers, clutching his phone like it was the last thread holding him to truth. And then a voice, low, calm, familiar. "I figured you'd be here." It was Raven, Tessa's older sibling, a non-binary tattoo artist with dyed silver hair and a leather jacket that smelled like lavender and smoke. Raven had once walked Ezra home from a protest when no one else would. They knelt beside him without judgment. "I saw the video," Raven said softly. "You did the right thing." Ezra nodded, but the ache in his chest didn't move. "You're coming with me," Raven added. No arguments. They didn't talk much on the way, but when Raven opened the door to their apartment, a warm space filled with plants, books, and a pride flag draped over the window, Ezra exhaled for the first time that day. Not in relief, but in recognition. Maybe this wasn't home, but it wasn't hell, and that was enough for now. He thought it ended with a video, but the truth had only begun to burn. If this story moves something in, you don't forget to follow Heart's story. There's more truth coming, and Ezra's not done speaking. Ezra didn't sleep that first night at Raven's place. He just stared at the ceiling fans spinning slowly, replaying the sound of Tessa's voice, the look in her eyes, the weight of being thrown out like garbage for doing the right thing. The next morning, Raven made tea and didn't ask questions. Instead, they made a phone call. By noon, Ezra was sitting across from a woman in a navy blazer with short, peppered hair and a quiet fire behind her glasses. Her name was Monroe. She introduced herself as an LGBTQ+ civil attorney, specializing in domestic abuse and student protection law. She didn't smile to soften him. She spoke directly, clearly, with a tone that said, "I believe you, and I'm ready." Ezra handed her the video. She watched it in silence, nodding once at the end. "We have a start," she said. "But if we want to fight back, we'll need more than one flame. We'll need fire." That's when Ezra remembered. The bruises Tessa had tried to hide weren't new. There were days she came to school in long sleeves, even in summer. Times her lip was swollen. Times she flinched when Jace put an arm around her in public. Tessa had never said a word, but now maybe she would. Raven drove Ezra to her apartment. Tessa's eyes widened when she opened the door, but she let them in. She sat across from Ezra, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, and listened as he told her everything about the video, about the night he got kicked out, about Monroe. Then, without a word, she walked into her bedroom and came back with the folder. Inside were screenshots of threatening messages Jace had sent her, photos of old bruises, and one voicemail so cold it made Ezra's stomach turn. But it didn't stop there. Ezra hesitated for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and found the photos. Months ago, he'd seen his mother in the kitchen, writing checks in a panic. He had managed to snap pictures of 3 of them before she noticed, each made out to different names. Each labeled in the memo line with vague phrases, wellness, graduation, emergency. But he remembered the look on her face like she was erasing something. Monroe reviewed the evidence and nodded slowly. "It's not just a pattern of abuse. It's a cover-up." Raven leaned forward. "Then we let the other voices in." They helped Ezra create a digital folder. They named it Truth File. Inside the video, screenshots, voice recordings, photos, and Ezra's written statement. Then they sent it to every girl they could remember Jace had dated. Days passed, nothing, until one reply from a girl named Maya. She said she had been forced to leave school after accusing Jace of assault 2 years ago. Her parents had been approached quietly. They accepted $40,000 to move away and stay quiet. She attached a photo, a check signed by Ezra's mother. The handwriting was identical. Ezra's hands shook as he read the message again and again. For the first time, his pain had an echo. Raven placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone, but to win this, you have to let them know." Ezra looked up, and Raven finished, voice steady, that he isn't either. Ezra didn't answer. He just stared at the glowing screen, at the words, at the truth. The world had believed in Jace Kane for far too long. It was time they started watching. Ezra thought that truth would be enough, that once people saw the bruises, the threats, the silence behind Jace's smiles, the world would shift in his favor. He underestimated what power could buy. Within days, the Kane family fought back, not with words, but with lawyers, expensive ones, the kind that specialized in manipulation dressed as legal counsel. They moved quickly, demanding that Ezra retract the accusations, threatening to sue for defamation, slandering his name in court filings filled with innuendo and misdirection. The public narrative changed. On local forums, whispers began to spread that Ezra had fabricated the video, that he'd manipulated Tessa into helping him, that he was mentally unstable, a troubled teen craving attention. Some of the rumors came from classmates, but others Ezra recognized the source. Jace. He had gone online himself, hiding behind fake usernames, spreading lies. He uploaded a video montage, Tessa laughing at a party, Ezra staring from the sidelines, footage taken from different years, stitched together with captions like "Jealousy turns to revenge." A voiceover claimed Tessa admitted to exaggerating the abuse. The video was fake, but it felt real enough to sway those who never wanted to look too deep. Ezra knew it was a tactic. Gaslight, distract, drown the truth in noise, but it worked, and it didn't stop there. Ms. Aldridge, his old English teacher, was the first adult to defend him publicly. She posted a statement on the school website, calling for an internal investigation. Within hours, she received a suspension notice pending review of unprofessional conduct. Ezra was still reeling when he got the message. It came from an anonymous number. Short, cold. "They're sending you to a place where kids come back straight." He stared at the screen. his pulse racing. He didn't want to believe it. But then Lila texted his little sister, 14. Too young to carry the weight she was born into, she begged him to listen. Their parents were already filling out paperwork, arranging for Ezra to be admitted to a conversion therapy program out of state. They called it a retreat. Ezra's blood turned cold. He had to act. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Raven drove him to the Kane house under cover of darkness. The plan was quick. Get in, find the black notebook, his mother's private ledger where she logged hush payments, contacts, cover-ups, and get out. Ezra knew the place like a memory he wanted to forget. Every creak of the floor, every shadow in the hallway. He found the ledger beneath a stack of old photo albums. Just as he opened it, the lights came on. His father stood at the door, fury in his fists. Ezra didn't run, he didn't speak, he just stood, breathing hard, as the man lunged toward him. But then Lila's voice cut through the chaos, sharp, cracked, terrified. Stop, he's not lying. Everything froze. In that moment, Lila chose truth over loyalty, and it cost her. Their father turned on her, his voice thunder, but she stood her ground, trembling but unmoving. Then headlights swept across the front yard. Monroe stepped out of the car like justice incarnate. She opened the door, her badge in one hand, the law on her side. Ezra clutched the ledger. Lila clutched Ezra. They didn't look back. In the silence of Raven's apartment, Lila said only one thing. I want to live with Ezra. And Ezra, for the first time in years, felt the weight of someone choosing him, not out of obligation, but out of faith. The golden boy had struck back, but Ezra wasn't falling. He was rising. It started as a whisper, then a headline, then a storm, the video Ezra recorded, the truth file Raven helped build, the ledger Ezra risked everything to retrieve. It was all in the hands of Monroe now, and Monroe didn't play to win quietly. Local news picked it up first. Football captain accused of abuse brother speaks out. Then came the interviews, Tessa's voice, Maya's statement, the screenshots, the checks, the pattern, the silence, and then the silence broke. 4 girls, each with their own story. Each one had once trusted Jace, and each one had been paid or pushed into silence. One of them had been expelled, another relocated out of state. One had attempted to take her own life. They stepped into the light with trembling voices, but unwavering truths. And one wasn't a girl. His name was Austin, a wide receiver on Jace's football team. He'd been silent for years, but when he saw Ezra's name on the news, he finally spoke. Jace had cornered him in the locker room once, not for being weak, but for being suspected of being gay. Jace beat him so badly. Austin missed 3 games. The coaches called it a sprain. The truth was locked in Austin's throat until now. The school board scrambled. The town split. There were those who stood with Ezra, who held signs and lit candles and said his name like it meant something. But others, they called him a liar. A disgrace, said he'd ruined a boy's future over a little mistake. They believed the image of Jace more than the reality of Ezra. Even as the evidence stacked higher, they closed their eyes tighter. Then came the blow no one expected. Ezra was suspended. The official reason, disruption of campus safety and learning environment. He hadn't raised a hand, but he had raised a voice. And in their eyes, that was louder than they could allow. Monroe didn't blink. She filed immediate counter litigation, citing Title IX violations, citing freedom of speech, citing the right to safety. She wasn't fighting for just Ezra anymore. She was fighting for every student the system had tried to silence. But even Monroe wasn't prepared for what Raven uncovered next. Raven, digging through archives, hacked voicemails, forgotten cloud backups, found it. A recording, crackled, low, but clear enough. It was a call between the Kane parents and the high school principal. 3 years ago. You'll sweep this, their mother said. We're donating new uniforms. their father added. And the principal's reply, as long as no one looks too closely, your son will be fine. A deal, a cover-up, a betrayal, institutional. But it didn't stop there. An independent investigator, tipped off by Monroe, traced Jace's medical history, and it was there, on paper. Prescription testosterone, prescribed when Jace was barely a teenager, not for a medical condition, not for transition, but for performance. Performance on the field, at the cost of every boy who couldn't fight back. Signed by his father, approved by his mother, documented, sealed, hidden. Until now, the picture was no longer about a violent boy. It was about the people who built him. As Monroe stood before the press, she didn't raise her voice. She simply held up the files and said, they didn't just raise a monster, they built one. And Ezra, he stood in the crowd, not behind anyone, not under anyone's shadow. For the first time, the town wasn't just seeing Jace, they were finally seeing Ezra. They tried to bury Ezra with silence, with shame, with exile, but the truth doesn't rot, it grows roots. The court ruled without hesitation. Jace Kane was found guilty on multiple counts: aggravated assault, intimidation of witnesses, and evidence tampering. Each charge was supported by videos, documents, testimonies, and years of concealed pain. No amount of charisma could overwrite what was finally undeniable. But the trial didn't end with Jace. It stretched its arms further into the hands that fed him. His parents stood trial for financial misconduct, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. The checks, the forced settlements, the forged documents, they had tried to protect a reputation, but the price was written in the bruises of every victim. Their legacy shattered under oath, and so did the illusion they had built around their name. Ezra and Lila didn't go back to the Kane house. They never planned to. Instead, they walked into a courtroom one final time, not for a trial, but for a hearing. That day, Raven and Monroe stood beside them as the judge declared Ezra Kane and Lila Kane officially under the permanent guardianship of Raven Thompson. It wasn't just a new home, it was a beginning Ezra had never known he was allowed to ask for. But the world outside still watched. So the school, under pressure from public outrage and federal review, did something no one expected. They organized a public event, a formal apology, delivered by the principal himself. He read it with trembling hands, on the same auditorium stage where Jace once held trophies. And then he announced the Rainbow Grant, a scholarship named in honor of Ezra Kane, created for LGBTQ+ students rejected by their families. It would fund their education, therapy, housing. Everything Ezra had once lost turned into something no one could take from another kid again. Ezra didn't cry on stage. He didn't need to. His silence said more than any speech could, and just when he thought the chapter had closed, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting familiar. Inside was a folded sheet. No greeting, no apology. Just words scribbled in ink that tried to look steady. I still don't think I did anything wrong, but if you need me to say I'm sorry just to sleep at night, here, I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't kill you when I had the chance. It was signed, Jace. Ezra held the paper in his hands for a long moment. Then he walked to the backyard behind Raven's apartment. There, in a rusted fire pit, he fed it to the flames. The smoke curled into the air. His gaze never broke. That wasn't for me, he whispered. That was his last chain. The wind shifted, light broke through clouds, and Ezra turned back to the house, where Lila was sketching with chalk on the patio, and Raven was laughing softly at the stove. They had tried to reduce him to ashes, but he had become something fire could never touch. They had silenced him for years, but this time he screamed with truth, and the world listened. If you were Ezra, would you have burned the letter too, or kept it as proof? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters. And don't forget to follow Heart Story, where truth becomes story, and story becomes power.